Hello, my name is John Weinmiller. I'm a member of the Knoxville Bar Association and a partner with the law firm of Merchant & Gould, P.C. From 2000 to 2002, I had the great good fortune to serve as a law clerk for the Honorable Curtis L. Collier of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Tennessee. Judge Collier joins me today, September 27th, 2022, to talk about his life and career. Welcome, Judge, and thank you for your continued support of the Knoxville Bar Association and its Legal History Project. Judge, would you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Curtis L. Collier. I'm a United States District Judge, and I was born on October 4, 1949.
You were born and raised in rural Arkansas. How did your childhood and youth in Arkansas shape you?
It is often said that the child is the father of the man, and I think that is definitely true in my case. I was born into segregation and poverty, and the cotton fields is the predominant thought that I have about my youth. Working in the cotton fields, playing in the cotton fields, being surrounded by people whose livelihoods were based upon cotton in some fashion or other. And I was an awful cotton picker. I was not designed for that type of work. And that was a great motivator for me to get out of those cotton fields and do something else with my life. I was also very fortunate to have parents who believed in education and who believed that we had a destiny that was greater than where we were at that time.
You had a number of wonderful teachers. I recall hearing one of them at the dedication of your official portrait. Would you say just a word about some of your teachers growing up?
That was Mr. Eason. Growing up in segregation, the teachers lived in your communities, and they'd gone through the same things that you had gone through. So you develop an attachment to many of them. Mr. Eason, the one you were talking about, was a male. Most of our teachers were female. He finished number one in his class in high school. He graduated from the same high school, which is also extremely rare there. He taught math and the sciences. And he was a very warm and outgoing man. And many of my teachers really had a lot of confidence in me. I remember some of them thought I'd be president one day. I was a star student at the school there. I have lasting memories of them, and I'm so grateful for all that they did to encourage me to do what I'm doing now.
I understand that one summer when you were doing a special program as a high school student, you participated in the historic March Against Fear, which was begun by James Meredith, who was murdered in 1966. How did the brutality of that murder, and more generally the violence and upheaval of the civil rights movement, affect you personally?
Well, thank goodness James Meredith was not murdered, he was shot. He had decided to march from Memphis to Jackson, Mississippi, and as we all know, he was the first black person to go to Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi. He undertook this against advice of all the other civil rights leaders. And just as he left Tennessee and was a few miles into Mississippi, someone shot him with a shotgun from ambush. The other civil rights leaders then decided to take up the helm, including Dr. Martin Luther King, and they marched from where he was shot into Jackson, Mississippi. The civil rights movement and the assassination of JFK probably had more of a formative influence on my life at that time than anything else. The civil rights movement to me meant that the environment that I grew up in, the obstacles that I faced, the limitations that were present at that time might be overcome. And that became an extremely important part of my life, an extremely important goal of mine. So being able to participate in that was a great experience, one of the highlights of my life. And I have to say that I was a good child. I obeyed my parents. My parents generally were very, very pleased with me, but that was one of the times when I disobeyed my parents because they forbid me from participating in the march.
You are a proud graduate of Tennessee State University and an inductee in the National Black College Alumni Hall of Fame. How did you decide to attend TSU? And how did your education there prepare you for your work as a practicing attorney and later as a judge?
When I graduated from high school, opportunities at higher education were also extremely limited for blacks. Two of the young men from my hometown had gone to Tennessee State and had done well there, and they were good students, good all-around people, and I decided I would go there also. One of the things that Tennessee State and I think most black universities offer is the importance of being flexible. Those schools don't have the same resources, they don't have the same faculty as majority schools. So students have to learn to innovate, and they have to learn to be flexible. A good example of this is one of my classmates, a fellow named James Scott, was an engineering major, and he got a job at one of the major paper manufacturers. And one of the problems that manufacturers had at that time was when you did a roll of paper, you had all this extra paper left at the end. And the practice was to cut the paper off, so you had all this extra paper that was lying around. So he suggested, well, why don't you just put glue on it, on the end, and just glue the tails. And that's what every paper manufacturer does now. Nothing in the book says to do that. There's nothing in a curriculum or the professors would say, well, that's what you do.
Innovation.
Innovation.
Speaking of innovation, I know that you spent at least one summer while a student at TSU working for, I believe it was Procter Gamble.
Procter Gamble.
Would you tell us what you did that summer? You'll give us an insight into your academic world before the law.
I was a chemistry major in college and really enjoyed chemistry. As I learned more about chemistry and got further along, I thought that I would be involved in product development instead of just basic research. So my summer job that year was to work on a product that would combat split ends. Split ends for men that have long hair or women that have long hair is an issue. And a competitor had come out with a product that they claimed took care of split ends. That was an exaggeration, it wasn't exactly true, but that was my project. So I did a lot of research and studying on hair. Hair is a lot like a cable. There's a covering around it, and then inside the covering, there are a lot of individual strands of hair. So if that covering is weakened or removed, then those individual hairs will split, and that split ends. And I subjected, we got a lot of hair samples, thousands and thousands of hair samples. We subjected the samples to infrared light because we were thinking that perhaps the sun had some effect on it. I devised a machine to comb the hair. So this machine would rotate with combs there to see if the physical force of the combs on these strands would destroy or injure the covering. And then what type of a covering, what type of material might prevent that. So it was a very challenging, a very good experience, and my supervisors really enjoyed it. They really liked it.
You may be the only federal judge who's also a hair expert. After TSU, you did not decide to follow a career in science, but instead went to law school. And I understand that you had your choice of at least Vanderbilt, Yale, and Duke. Now, as anyone who's been around you in basketball season knows, you chose Duke, and you graduated from there, I think, in 1974. Could you tell us, first of all, why it is that you chose to go to law school? as opposed to following your chemistry career. And then tell us a little bit about how your legal education at Duke shaped you as a jurist.
I had a great time at Procter Gamble in Cincinnati that summer, and as I said, people liked what I was doing. I enjoyed the research. I enjoyed the challenge. But on a good day, I would see three people. I see my supervisor's supervisor, and the mail person. And I'm 20 years old, and I'm thinking, do I really want to spend the next 30, 40 years of my life being this isolated from other human beings? And I decided that I probably did not. One of the other students in the program was at Michigan State. He was a packaging engineering major, and he had arranged a tour of the patent law department. Procter Gamble at that time had about 110 patent lawyers. They were one of the largest patent law departments in corporations at that time. And I asked if I could go with him, and he called and they said, yeah. So we spent about a day and a half there, and it was very intriguing. And I found out that patent lawyers will almost always have a job, because there are not an awful lot of lawyers with that technical background. So there's always a need for patent lawyers, which sounded good. And I also thought that if I decided I didn't want to do that, then the law was broad enough that I could venture into something else. So that's what I decided to do. When I came back to school, I did everything wrong. I did not take any courses or anything. I took the LSAT, and again I did things wrong. Only applied to 5 schools, the wrong types of schools, and Duke was one of the schools that accepted me, and I decided to go to Duke, which turned out to be a very good decision. Duke it still is a small school. It was much smaller back then. I got to know all my professors. I still remember them. I remember their mannerisms. The professors that would bounce off the blackboards, the professors that wore fancy clothes. Each one was different in some way. But it was a great academic experience, and it was a great experience in terms of exposing me to another world. There was a huge culture shock. So you can imagine a black child from rural Arkansas, growing up in poverty, going to segregated schools, going to pretty much all black college, and then finding himself at a major university where many of the students went to exclusive private colleges, and many of them came from wealth. One of my classmates was a heir to the Hershey's, and the family bought her a house so she could live in while she was at school. That was a huge shock to me. No one in East Arkansas could afford to do that.
You mentioned that at least while you were spending that summer at Procter & Gamble, you spent the day with the patent law department at Procter & Gamble. Did your time at Duke include any study of patent law?
Well, Duke at that time was a small school, and it was geared toward putting people on Wall Street. I would always tell people that if you wanted to take a tax course, you could fill up your schedule every single semester and still not take them all. If you wanted to take a course designed to actually interact with people, you could do all that in one semester and probably have time left over. Duke at that time was really focused on corporate law, so we had taxation, corporate structure. I think there may have been an upper level class on patents. I'm not even sure of that. There would not have been more than one class at that time. Things have changed an awful lot now. Intellectual property is much bigger now than it was back then. Employment discrimination did not exist back then. So Duke was a school that had a reputation for producing very good tax lawyers.
And did you take many criminal law classes at I'm just thinking about your work as a judge and whether the classwork you did at Duke had a particular influence or effect on your career, first as an assistant United States attorney and then as a judge. And it sounds like maybe the answer is no.
You're correct. The answer is no. And this is not to disparage Duke, but I took every criminal law course that you can take there. And it wasn't until I took the bar examination preparation that I learned there were such things as elements of crimes. We never, ever were exposed to that at Duke. We learned an awful lot about the insanity defense. We learned about the laws in New Zealand, the laws in the other places, but we really did not spend an awful lot of time learning about American law and the laws in the various states. I took an upper level course, and we spent all that time looking at and reviewing a proposed amendment to the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Well, speaking of that, after law school, you spent several years in the Air Force Judge Advocate General's Corps. You left that service with the Meritorious Service Medal, 4 Air Force Commendation Medals, and even the Small Arms Marksman's Ribbon. It was there that you tried your first cases and learned the nuances of the legal system. Share with us, if you would, a couple memorable and meaningful experiences from your time in the JAG Corps, and how that either built on your time at Duke or took you in a completely different direction.
My parents could not afford to pay my way through Tennessee State or law school. So at the time I entered Tennessee State, all males had to be enrolled in ROTC. And I did very, very well in ROTC, so they gave me a scholarship. So ROTC paid my way through undergraduate school. But in return, I owed the Air Force 4 years of my life. They allowed me to go to law school instead of coming into the Air Force right after I graduated. But when I graduated from law school, I had to live up to my side of the bargain. And one of the great things about military service for a lawyer is you're given responsibility early on. During my first year, I was assigned a $3 or $4 million medical malpractice case involving a woman who had Crohn's disease that was not diagnosed by the hospital. That responsibility really weighs on you, but you learn from it. It's good experience if you do it right. And I was also assigned a trials by court-martial and found out I had a real talent for that. I had a real ability to apply the law and apply the facts, and my supervisor really enjoyed that. One of the noteworthy cases that I handled was one involving Staff Sergeant Scott. Sergeant Scott looked like a poster boy for the military. He had all the looks of a military person. In fact, his career was pretty much a poster child. When he was in basic training, he was walking down the street and an apartment was on fire. And he ran into the burning apartment and rescued a woman and her child and brought the child out. We were in the Philippines, and in any third world country where you have a first world nation like us, there's going to be a lot of thievery involved. Those people have almost nothing, and they look around and here's this great first world facility with everything. In fact, more than people actually need there. So there was a lot of theft going on, and Sergeant Scott was assigned to combat the thefts. Well, one way he decided to combat the thefts was he picked up this Filipino, and Filipinos are smaller than we are. The average Filipino male is about 5'3", 5'4", and may weigh 110 pounds, 120 pounds or so. So he brings this person into the military police facility, and he starts beating him and torturing him. And I prosecuted the case. Because of his background and his heroics, it would have been easy to say, well, let's just let this go. No, he's been a great guy. He's been great for the Air Force, and we're always going to have these thefts. So prosecuting him is really not going to do anything. And I think that's an example of how we have to uphold the rule of law, regardless of the consequences and regardless of how other people feel about it. So I got a conviction and Sergeant Scott was discharged with a bad conduct discharge. He had to forfeit all of his pay, and he was reduced to the lowest rank there. In some sense, it was a sad case, but in another sense, it was fulfilling the rule of law.
After you spent your time in the Air Force JAG Corps, you found yourself in New Orleans. How did you end up joining the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Orleans?
Well, all the military services believe in up or out. You either have to make rank or you're discharged. And at the captain level, they do not want you to actually do work anymore. They want you to supervise and train other people. So I found something I really enjoyed. I thought I had real talent for, and that was trying cases. And the Air Force is now telling me, we don't want you doing that anymore. We want you to train new lawyers. We want you to supervise them, but we don't want you in a courtroom anymore. And so this would have been, I would have been about 28 years old then. And I decided that I didn't want to give that up. So I started looking for civilian jobs, and I wanted to still be in the courtroom. I enjoyed prosecution, so I wanted to be on the prosecution side. And I wanted to do it at the federal level. So that meant I had to work in main justice in D.C. or in a U.S. Attorney's office someplace. So I decided to apply for U.S. Attorney's positions in the Southeast and got an offer from New Orleans. And that was the best place for someone with my talent and my inclinations to go, because New Orleans has a huge problem with public corruption and white-collar crimes. And after I worked in the office for about a year to 2 years ago, I was assigned to the white-collar unit, ultimately became head of that unit, and learned an awful lot of techniques about trying cases. We always went up against some of the best lawyers. Many of our big cases involved lawyers from New York or D.C. or Miami that came in to represent defendants. So it was an extremely good experience for a lawyer who was interested in prosecuting white-collar cases.
Now, I know that in 1991, you received the Department of Justice's Special Commendation Award for your management and prosecution of a major public corruption investigation. Tell us about that case.
That was Operation Rocky Top. And it involved, of all things, bingo, charitable bingo. Tennessee decided to pass a law which would allow charities to operate bingo games. And they had in mind the Catholic Church that would have bingo games in the basement. But what happened was professional gamblers decided to come in. So we had people from South Carolina, Georgia, and other places came in. They would rent out these huge public facilities, and they would play bingo there using the name of a facility. So let's say you're a small black church, and you may bring in $500 a week. They'll guarantee you $500 a week if you let them use the church's name. And then they'd operate a bingo game. They may bring in tens of thousands of dollars, and they give the church the $500 that they promised. Well, the state has certain conditions. One condition was that the games had to be operated on the premises of the charity. Only members of the charity could operate the games. All the money had to go to the benefit of the charity. So you had a multitude of violations there by these outsiders. So they would pretend to be the charity, and sometimes they would create a charity. They would invent a charity so that they could play bingo, and it became flagrant. One of the problems when we have gambling like that's open, and it has to be open because they want to attract customers, is they're regulators. And the regulators, if they look at what's going on, will know what's going on and have to put a stop to it. So what do? Well, you pay off the regulators. So you get public corruption from that also. We obtained somewhere between 50 and 75 convictions all over the state, Knoxville, Chattanooga, Nashville, and Memphis. We convicted the number 2 and number 3 people at the Secretary of State's office in Tennessee, because that office was charged with the regulation of bingo. So that was a pattern for combating this. I actually was asked to testify before the Virginia House, not the Vermont House of Representatives, because they were thinking about doing the same thing, permitting charitable bingo, and they want to hear my experiences here in Tennessee. The law requires honest people and faithful people. And if you have a situation where the money is so great that it's going to tempt people to not do what they're supposed to do, then you're asking for trouble.
Speaking of money, and you mentioned that in this particular operation, the operators would clear thousands of dollars and maybe pay the charity just a pittance for use of the facility. Was the government able to recover any of the money and actually give it to the charities?
In some instances, we were able to recover money, and we would try to get that money to victims, if there were victims. But you have to keep in mind that sometimes the charities were complicit. They had knowingly permitted someone else to use their name when they knew that they were not operating these games. So it would be hard to consider them real victims. They were perpetrating the fraud. The fraud was more on society. Society had decided it was going to allow something to operate because they thought there'd be some social good to it. And instead of being a social good, it turned out to be a social evil.
So this was from the time when you were in Chattanooga.
Yes.
Tell us how you got from New Orleans to Chattanooga.
Well, it had more to do with my children than anything else. South Louisiana is very different from the rest of the country. The origins, the thoughts and philosophies are very, very different there than what we experience in most of the country. When I was there, people did not believe in education. They did not believe in hard work. So I'm trying to teach my kids one thing at home. I'm telling them that it's really important to do well in school. It's really important to stick to school. It's really important to have ambition. It's really important to be honest. And they're looking around and they're seeing mayors and governors and university professors. You're seeing other people espouse a completely different attitude. And I became very, very concerned with that. I was also becoming less tolerant of big city life. The 2-hour commute, the crime, the poor schools, a lot of the problems that we see in big city life. So I decided I wanted to move to a smaller place that was more conducive to raising kids. And I got an offer to come to Chattanooga by John Gill, the U.S. Attorney here in Knoxville at the time. And that's how I wound up in Chattanooga. Another rock, I said that my mother forbid me from participating in the march in Mississippi. She also thought it was an awful decision for me to leave New Orleans and come to Chattanooga. She said I was doing well in New Orleans. They liked me there, so she didn't see any need for me to take a chance and to come to Tennessee.
I'm guessing your hometown in Arkansas is closer to New Orleans than it is to Chattanooga.
It is.
Not a coincidence, I'm sure. Tell us, you just mentioned your children. Tell us a bit about your family. You're obviously a proud husband and father and now grandfather.
Well, I was very fortunate to have parents that stuck together during very, very tough times. There were instances when I was growing up when we didn't have food in the refrigerator, didn't have heat in the house, but my parents stuck together. There were 9 of us children. One died in childhood. All of us brothers and sisters went to college. 4 of us went on to obtain degrees after we received our doctorates. And as we get older, we reflect back on what our parents gave us. They gave us something that was a lot more valuable than money, or gold or material wealth. They gave us things that we can make use of. We can better ourselves, we can better our children and our grandchildren. So that's a lot more important than any amount of money or wealth could have done. Moving to Chattanooga was an excellent decision. All my kids have done well. They've all gotten jobs. My oldest son is a police officer. The next one, my daughter. She's the number 2 person in the Georgia Department of Adult Higher Education. She has a PhD. My youngest son has an autistic bent, and he just published his first book about 3 or 4 months ago, and he signed a contract with second book now. He just got married a year ago, so I'm extremely pleased. I have two grandchildren. My daughter has them, and we keep in touch with them, and they are a delight. They are a joy.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't ask about Mrs. Collier, who your law clerks often called Mrs. Judge. A truly wonderful and warm woman.
Well, thank you. She's had some health issues, but she's doing very well, and I really appreciate that. She had some back surgery, and the surgery did not go well, but she's mobile, and she can do a lot, so we've had to make some adjustments in our lives. Our plans to go to the South Pacific, we think we'll just have to put on hold. We're not sure that's going to really be in our wheelhouse anymore, but we have so much more to be thankful for.
Absolutely. You mentioned John Gill a moment ago. John Gill's a friend of many attorneys here in Knoxville, including myself, and he and I were talking a bit the other day about you and President Clinton's nomination of you to the bench in 1995. As I said, you were nominated in 1995, and if I remember correctly, it was to fill a newly created seat on the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Tennessee. And also, you were confirmed by the Senate something like 3 months later, which is virtually unheard of nowadays for a nomination to go through that quickly. Could you tell us what you remember most about your nomination and confirmation process?
Well, confirmations have always been political. The difference now is they're also very partisan, and they're very partisan in a negative and bitter way. The senior senator from Tennessee at that time was Jim Sasser, and had the Democrats won the Senate at the next election, he would have been the Senate Majority Leader. So he would have been the most powerful person in the Senate. He nominated me and 2 other lawyers, Jerry Summers, who was a very prominent criminal defense attorney, and Mike Calloway, a very prominent civil attorney from Bradley County, to the president. I thought that my problem was going to be at the local level, because I had not been involved in politics, so I had not made campaign contributions, did not have the close connection. But I thought if it went to Washington, I would be on much more solid ground. An illustration of that, we were all interviewed at separate times by a group of lawyers. And the top lawyer there was L.D. Atchison. And she was a roommate of Hillary Clinton's in college. And she was also the biggest fundraiser for the Clinton campaign in the entire Northeast. So she'd raised more money. And I'm not sure who was actually chairing the group. There were about maybe 8 or 9 lawyers there. But I understood the real power in the room was going to be L.D. Atchison. So I'd done a lot of work on her to find out what she was interested in. She had a real deep interest in children's issue. I was on the Children's Advocacy Center board at the time. I was on the board of the Girl Scouts. So I'd done an awful lot of work there. So regardless of what the question was, the answer was directed to her. I may not have looked at her, but the answer was directed to her. So I came out of there with the White House's nod, and they told me on the 4th of July that I was going to get it. And then that November, there is a sweep of Democrats. So almost every single Democrat running for office lost, and the Republicans won. So now my sponsor is gone. The White House is not sure how this new Republican majority is going to treat their nominees. And I was in the second batch to go through, and I think we went through as a test. I cannot imagine this happening now, but Senator Thompson, Senator Frisk, and Congressman Wamp, all Republicans, testified in my behalf at my hearing. In fact, Senator Thompson said something that I was tempted to stand up and correct, but decided that I should not. He said I had the 10th best prosecution record in the entire United States. I don't think anybody keeps records like that. And I was pretty sure that was an exaggeration, but he's a United States Senator. And I did not see it was really appropriate for me to try to make a correction. So, and I don't know that he was on oath when he said that.
Well, it turned out all right. When you took the bench in 1995, you were one of a relatively small number of judges who were not white men. Today, the benches of both the federal and state courts are more diverse than ever. Why, in your view, is it important for judges to look like the communities in which they serve?
The judiciary is a critical component in our government, and it's also critical to our society. I'm an example of talent that could have gone unrealized. Had I been born 10 years earlier, I would not be where I am now. And to the extent that I have made a positive contribution to the judiciary and to society, then that contribution would not have been made had it not been for the possibility of having people that look like me on the bench. And I think that's true across the board. We are a huge country, a hugely diverse country, with people from all walks of life, all beliefs, all nationalities, all ethnicities, and all those people have some ability to make a contribution to make this nation bigger and better. And we start closing doors, then we are actually harming ourselves because we're cutting off the possibility of those gifts being realized. I'll share with you a story that Judge Bernice Donald told me when she first went on the bench. She was assigned a black quorum deputy. She was assigned a black court reporter. In her first case, there's this young white fellow who comes up, and every single person in authority in the courtroom was a black person. And she said she could see the confusion on his face as he's looking around. He's thinking, "Where am I?" I think it's also important that people have an understanding that there are people like them at some levels in this government that we have.
In 2015, you were awarded the American Inns of Court Professionalism Award for the Sixth Circuit. Civility and professionalism has been at the center of your work, and your efforts to advance their cause is at the heart of your legacy. Why are civility and professionalism so important, and is that a greater importance today than it was when you first became a lawyer?
I think it's much more important now than it was early on because of the division, the hostility, the partisanship we see in our nation. We lawyers come from that large society, and we have a tendency to bring some of those unfortunate happenings in a large society into our profession with us. If you watch television, you watch movies, you read books, you see an awful lot of inappropriate language, inappropriate behavior. And they began to think that's normal. Well, the profession is designed to resolve disputes. And a lot of disputes are very heated, There's a lot of passion, emotion involved in them. And if the lawyers egg on the parties, throw gasoline on the fire, it makes it that much more difficult to resolve the dispute. So lawyers of all professions have to be very, very mindful that we have a special responsibility to treat each other, to treat our clients, to treat witnesses, to treat the opposition, and to treat the court and court personnel with civility. Because if we don't, we run the risk of losing this. I'm very, very proud of the profession and our judiciary. I think our judiciary is as great as there's ever been. But there's nothing magic that says it will remain forever. And it's up to all of us to do all that we can to make sure it's available for the next generation and generation after that.
Some of the work that you do is obviously with the current crop of lawyers, the benches or the bars of the communities in the Eastern District, but you also do work with children in the area of civics. Would you talk just a little bit about your work to advance civics education in the Chattanooga community?
Well, it's not just the Chattanooga community. I was teaching at a seminar for district judges with about 5 to 10 years experience a few years ago. And we gave them a project. And the project was to identify the single most critical challenge facing the courts. To a person, they said the declining confidence in the courts. As I thought about that, I thought that is so true, because we depend upon voluntary compliance for everything that we do. If a civil litigant loses, that litigant will pay money to the winning side without any additional involvement from the court. If we tell a defendant to show up for a trial, the defendant shows up for trial. If we tell a juror to show up to serve as a juror, the juror shows up, all because they have confidence in the court. So that to the extent that society starts losing confidence in the courts, then a lot of that voluntary compliance is going to stop. It doesn't require a majority. If only 30% of the people refuse to obey court orders, or 30% of the jurors refuse to show up, we will be in deep, deep, deep trouble. So I was very, very touched by that. And on the way back to Chattanooga, the seminar was held in Nashville at Vanderbilt. I started thinking to myself, well, you know, this is such an important concept because it really threatens the judiciary. And it seems to me that the president ought to be concerned about that. Members of Congress ought to be concerned about that. But the only person you hear talking about is Sandra Day O'Connor, a retired Supreme Court justice. So I'm fuming now. I'm getting very upset. And I got about halfway back to Chattanooga, and then I say, well, Curtis, that's all well and good, but what about you? What are you doing about it? I said, well, I'm just one person. There's nothing I can do about it. And the closer I got to Chattanooga, the more I realized that cannot be the answer. So I started my efforts at that time, and we have a circuit civics outreach and education committee made up of judges throughout the circuit, and we're involved in doing things to educate the public. And we also have a similar committee here in the Eastern District of Tennessee, and I'm encouraging every district in the circuit to establish a committee to work on it. Just to show you some of the range of this, I got a communication from the chief judge in Central District of California just last week, and she's picked up our idea of having a public reading of the Constitution. And my goal is to have every district court in the nation be actively engaged in civics education, to reach out to the public, to let them know how important our court system is and the dangers that our country will face if the public loses confidence in our judiciary.
Well, that expands far beyond Chattanooga, doesn't it? But let's focus on Chattanooga just a moment. You've lived there now for several decades. I know you're very active in the community. You mentioned your work with the Children's Advocacy Center and a few others. Talk to us a bit about why you're involved in your community in this respect and what you think the obligation lawyers have to be involved in their community?
We lawyers have been given a great gift. We have a monopoly on the delivery of legal services. And from the time this country was formed, lawyers have been involved in the most important and also foundational issues. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Madison, Lincoln, during the Civil War. The profession lends itself to leadership. We have knowledge and we have skills. One of the things that we have to practice is civil discourse. There's a huge need for civil discourse in our country right now. The ability to listen to someone else, think about what they're saying, wait for them to finish, respond in a civil and respectful manner. You don't raise your voice, you don't shout, you don't call names. There's so many things that we lawyers do and we learn that would be beneficial to the larger society. And I think because we've been given this monopoly, and also because we have these skills, we have an obligation to give back. For judges, there's an additional element to it. We are leaders of the profession by our position, and we have an obligation, in my view, to also be models to the rest of the profession. So if we want lawyers to do things, then we judges have to do things also. We cannot do things that many lawyers can do. The code of ethics and also what's in the realm of propriety for judges won't allow us to do some things that lawyers can do. But if lawyers just took it upon themselves to be involved in more, we would be a better society.
Let me follow up on the role of a judge. In your opinions, and when addressing litigants and defendants from the bench, you are known to refer to yourself as the court, avoiding the first person. If I remember correctly, you also insist on spelling out United States District Court instead of using the abbreviation U.S. District Court. Why are these seemingly innocuous things so important? Or put another way, what does it mean when a man or woman comes out of the bar and dons the robe to serve as a judge?
As I said earlier, the judiciary is a critical institution in our government and our society. And I think it's important for us to not view it as just individuals doing things or making decisions, but it's an institution that's making decisions. So when I order something, I don't want people to think that Curtis Collier ordered me to go to jail, or Curtis Collier ordered me to pay money to the other side. If we think of the actions in that way, it's really hard to see how that is justice. When we think of this as the action of an institution has been around for 240 years. An institution made up of a wide variety of people, then it makes a much bigger difference. I think it has a greater impact on people. For some of the same reasons, I don't like the idea of labeling judges as Obama judges or Bush judges or Clinton judges. I think that takes away from them. I'm always pleased when a Clinton judge rules in a way that goes against the stereotype, or Bush judge rules in a way that goes against the stereotype. The institution is going to be around for a long time, we hope. Curtis Collier is not going to be around for a long time. No individual judge is going to hold that position forever. They're going to come and they're going to leave. But this institution ought to be around for a very, very long time. And I think by referring to it as a court, you're taking the individual out of it and you're emphasizing the institutional aspect of the position.
Thank you. Judge, what have been some of the biggest joys you've experienced serving as a judge?
Well, the biggest joy of all is service. Being a judge gives you a chance to perform a public service at one of the highest levels of all. Everything that we do is a service to the public. Even if we are resolving a bitter dispute where one side walks away happy, the other side walks away unhappy, you're at least allowing them to get on with their lives. And my experience is that even most of the time when a party loses, they understand they were heard, they were listened to, the judge understood the issues, and they just did not win. They may not like losing, but they understand that they got a fair shot.
And the flip side, what have been some of the more profound challenges you faced and you and your other fellow judges face as judges?
The biggest challenge that judges face on the federal level, I can't speak to the state level, is a huge variety of cases that come before us. I thought I had a pretty good grasp on federal practice. I've been a U.S. attorney for 16 years and a U.S. attorney's office for 16 years. Had done some civil work there in the military. I had done civil work, all federal. When I became a federal judge, I found out there were tons of statutes I never heard of. Congress is passing new laws all the time. So just keeping up with the variety of law is a challenge. We have more cases than any one person can handle, so that's also a challenge. Another challenge that people don't think all that much about, but it really impacts judges, and that's isolation. When you become a judge, it's a little bit like becoming a priest. There are things that you cannot do anymore. There are places you cannot go anymore. There are things you cannot say anymore. And people around you treat you differently, which was a surprise. People who've been inviting me to things, and I've been close to for a long time, stopped inviting me to things. They talk differently around me now. The good side is that they understand that a judge is in a different position. So a lot of that is a sign of respect. But from the human standpoint, you're used to certain flows in life. You're used to certain people, you're used to certain activities. And then those activities are being shut down one by one by one by one. And it takes some getting used to. I'm a natural introvert. I think someone who's an extrovert who becomes a judge has an extremely difficult time because they get a lot of their energy from associating with other people, and a lot of that outside contact is curtailed.
Judge, do you have any words of advice for the students who are in this year's graduating class from law school, or a high schooler might be looking to go to law school in the future, the next generation of lawyers?
Well, for people in law school who are about to enter into the profession, I like to congratulate them, let them know that they are about to enter a noble and honorable profession. It's a profession that is fulfilling. It is a profession that allows them to give an awful lot back to society and also to influence the course of society, regardless of what position they have, whether they have a government position or whether they're just doing wills and contracts for someone. They're actually doing the nuts and bolts to make our society whole. But someone who is in high school, who's thinking of going to law school, or someone that's in college who's thinking of going to law school, think very, very carefully about it and look closely in yourself to see what your passions are. The law is a profession where you can combine your passions with the law. And even if you're not making an awful lot of money, if you're getting up every day with a smile on your face, because you know you're going to be doing something that's worthwhile and fulfilling, that makes for a successful career.
We've got just two more questions. First is there anything else that you would like to share with the KBA and its members?
Well, we talked a little bit about the importance of reaching out and giving back. You become a more whole person by being involved in a variety of things. And we lawyers can lend a degree of common sense, a degree of practicality to many organizations, even if it's not strictly legal. I learned an awful lot from all the organizations that I belong to. This is an example that I was on the board of a charity that assisted people with mental challenges. And the staff decided to have a Christmas party, which was a great idea. They want to show some independence, want to have some fun, and they wanted to sell alcohol, serve alcohol, because they thought that would show a degree of trust. And I suggested that there are other ways that we could show trust. And do you really want to get up in the morning and read in the paper that one of our clients was involved in an accident and they were intoxicated and they got in their alcohol from our charity? That's really not a story that we'd like to read in the paper. But we can do things like that. Just by being involved in an organization, we can steer them away from some things that they may not have thought about, and we can perhaps direct them in better ways. So being involved in organizations is a great thing, especially for youth now. A lot of our youth don't have good role models. So being involved in something, they can see someone who is successful, who's done well. Just being able to see that person many times is enough.
Judge, my final question is this. As I am privileged to know personally, you have developed deep and enduring relationships with your law clerks and interns. What has it meant to you to have law clerks and interns, and why, in your view, is it so important that new lawyers have the opportunity to work with judges?
I am always awestruck that law students who've done very well in their courses from all over the United States will apply to come to Chattanooga, Tennessee to spend a year or 2 years of their life with me, when they can go to so many other places and make a lot more money. I've had a little bit over 40 law clerks so far, and I'm so proud of each and every one. And the relationship between the federal judge and law clerk is unlike anything else. There are things that a judge can talk to their law clerk about, they cannot talk to their wife or their husband about. They cannot talk to their best friend about. The way I use my law clerks is they are confessors, they're advisors, they're counselors. They do an awful lot to make me a better judge and also a better person. Some of the things I've done in my life that I look back on, I'm most proud of was because of a law clerk. I swore in Rodney Slater as the Secretary of Transportation during the Clinton administration. One of my law clerks convinced me to do that. I look for people that are talented, that have good personalities, and I want to make use of their talents. That means I have to give them an awful lot of autonomy and an awful lot of respect.
Judge Collier, thank you for your service. Thank you for your time today. It's been a great honor.